Welcome back to a Life Under Construction podcast. I'm your host, Rhoda Daniel, and I'm extremely grateful that you have chosen to join me today. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode. If you haven't watched it yet, please go ahead and watch that first because we had a very special guest join us. Based on all the feedback that I received, that episode was a great one. But it's back to me today, just me. But I promise you that this episode is going to be just as thought provoking as the last one. As you can see by the title, we are going to be talking about solitude today. But what I mean by solitude is not physically being alone, separating yourself from society or people, going up to the mountains to sit there in the presence of God and nature. And though that might sound good right about now, and some of you are nodding, saying that yes, that sounds really good right now, this is not the solitude that I'm going to be talking about in this episode. I'm talking about solitude of the mind, a state of mind where your mind is free from the inputs of other minds. I'll repeat that again, a state of mind where your mind is free from the inputs of other minds. In today's day and age, that seems unthinkable because we are constantly bombarded by other minds, whether it is through entertainment, whether it is through videos, whether it is through social media, whether it is through the news. We are constantly bombarded by information. We are constantly bombarded by opinions. We are constantly bombarded by other people's ideas that we don't have time to think on our own. In the first episode of this season, I talked about Martin Luther King Jr., if you remember, where I admired his ability to pursue a life of purpose beyond what a regular human being would choose to pursue. Little did I know that as I thought about solitude, researched about solitude, read about solitude, that I would end up once again coming back to the life of Martin Luther King Jr. to read about the turning point in his life, a day that changed the course of history. Little did I know that I would read about that day, and that day was rooted in solitude. It is said that Martin Luther King Jr. stumbled into the civil rights cause by accident. He just happened to be a charismatic and well-educated minister in a town where the locals and the local bodies were standing up against racial discrimination. Because of that, he just got pulled into the movement, and he even went to jail for that very cause. On that day, when he was released from jail, when he went back to his family, to his wife and his little daughter, he decided it was time to really think about what he stood for, who he was, and what he stood for. That night, after his wife and daughter were in bed, he sat down at his kitchen table, had a cup of coffee with him. He reflected and he prayed in that solitude. He sat alone with his thoughts and thought about the present and thought about the future. He thought about what was happening in his country, in his part of the world. He thought about what part he played in that moment. He might have wondered whether he actually needed to play a part, but it was in that moment that he heard that inner voice say, Martin Luther, stand up for righteousness, stand up for justice, stand up for truth. The rest, as they say, was history. It took just that one moment in time where he gave himself the space to sit alone with his own thoughts, to be able to decide what kind of man he wanted to be and what role he wanted to play in history. That moment of solitude gave him a vision for the future. That moment of solitude clarified who he was and who he wanted to be. I'm afraid that we have lost out on our ability to sit alone in silence, our ability to sit alone with our own thoughts, to think and reflect on our life. Yes, I know we all are busy. We have kids, we have spouses, we have parents, we have work, we have hobbies, we have friends to keep track of. We are busy. Who has the time for solitude? You might tell me that even if I want solitude or I desire solitude, no one's leaving me alone. I'm always surrounded by people who need my attention. How then can I find solitude? How then can I find time to sit alone with my thoughts? I understand that. I completely do. But I also believe that the busier you are, the more essential it is for you to find solitude. As Benjamin Franklin said, solitude is an agreeable refreshment to a busy mind. The busier we are, the more solitude we need. But our world has told us differently. The busier we get, the one thing that we give up on is that time alone with our own thoughts, because it seems unimportant. Little do we know that it is those moments that make us or break us. If Martin Luther King had not taken that time to sit with his own thoughts, to clarify to himself, what do I stand for? Is this important for me? He wouldn't have been the man that he was, the man that we know him as. Because he would have just gone with the flow, whatever was happening, whatever other people were doing, he would have just done that. Even though he was a part of the movement, he could have done the bare minimum, because I'm sure there were many people part of that movement. But he listened to that inner voice that told him in that silence, Martin Luther, stand up for righteousness, stand up for justice, stand up for truth. If he had not tuned out the noise around him, he wouldn't have been able to hear that voice. Have we created time in our lives to be able to hear that inner voice? Do we slow down enough to hear that still small voice whisper into our ears about who we need to be? Again, I'm not talking about physical separation. You can be sitting in the midst of chaos and mentally still be focused on your thoughts and your reflections. The opposite is also true. You can be alone and yet still have external input, because when we are alone, we tend to listen to music, listen to a podcast, read a book. We're constantly listening to the minds of other people rather than focusing on what we need to focus on in that time. What is then required of us? We need to be able to learn how to turn down the noise of that external stimuli. We need to be able to sit in silence with our own thoughts. We need to be able to feel bored sometimes. Some of us are afraid of our own thoughts. We are afraid of the direction our mind will take us if we sit alone with our thoughts. And yes, sometimes our mind will take us in random directions that we do not want to go on. But I promise you, if you sit there long enough in that discomfort with your own thoughts, slowly your mind will start focusing on what actually matters. Your mind will work through that clutter of all those thoughts, all those fears, all those anxieties. It starts sifting through those thoughts, and you get to the good part. You get to the part where you start getting ideas. You start getting thoughts about new things that you never thought of before, just because you hadn't slowed down enough to think. When we slow down, when we sit with our thoughts, we start thinking about the things that shape our existence. We start thinking about the things that give us strength and courage to face the day, to face our lives. We start thinking about vision for the future. We start thinking about our goals. We start thinking about what is it that we want to do with our lives. That reflection is missing in our world somehow. And I don't blame you, because we are surrounded by noise. But I also believe that it is something that is in our control. We just need to learn how to switch off that noise, to take that time to separate ourselves. Maybe sometimes we need to physically separate ourselves to find that time. We might have to wake up earlier, stay up later, do the things that require us to find space in order to reflect and think. There is enough research out there, and you might have read it as well, that tells us that solitude is important for productivity, solitude is important for happiness, and solitude is also important for finding meaning and purpose in life. because it is only when we take that time to sit with our own thoughts and our own experiences and wrestle with them that we truly understand and we can ask the questions: who are we? Why are we here? What are we doing? What are we supposed to be doing? Who do I want to become in life? Am I on that path of becoming? What do I need to do to get on that path? Maybe I started something, but am I still on that path? Or have I deviated from that path a little bit? Without that thinking, without that reflection, we are just floating through life, just alive but not truly living, just on some path that somebody has put us on, going to a destination that once we reach there, we're like, this isn't where I wanted to be in the first place. There is this analogy that is often given of life being like flying a plane. For a pilot, a 1 degree deviation from the coordinates given can change the destination completely. A 1 degree deviation from the path that we are supposed to be on in life has the same effect. We might not even realize that we are veering off course because 1 degree is a very small, minute change. It's one decision over here, one choice made over there, one habit that we are unable to break, one part of our daily routine that isn't really helping us in any way. It is these small things that on their own don't seem as much. But when put together, we realize, and often too late, that we have deviated from the path entirely and reached a destination that we didn't want to go in the first place. So how do we ensure that doesn't happen? How do we ensure that we don't end up becoming someone or reaching a place that we didn't want to be in? That's where solitude comes in. That's where we take that time to think, to reflect, to observe our life, to just check in with ourselves, to see whether we are on that path that we had wanted to go on. Randall Stutman is a man who was an advisor to many of the big CEOs on Wall Street. And one of the things over his years of experience he did was analyze how these great leaders spend their time to recharge. These were busy people. Obviously, they were CEOs of some of the biggest organizations in the world. And he found that they were doing things like long distance cycling, sailing, scuba diving, listening to classical music, riding motorcycles, and fly fishing, things like that. And the common thread between all these activities was that there was an absence of voices. There was an absence of noise. Now, you and I don't have to go scuba diving or go fly fishing for that matter, but what is it that we can do to reduce the voices in our time to recharge? To reduce the noise in our time to recharge. And one of the simplest things that we can do is put technology away. Because one of our biggest distractions, one of our biggest weaknesses, one of the biggest reasons that we have lost the ability to sit in silence is technology. Constant hyper-connectedness and constant noise is a part of our life and has become a part of our lives because we are constantly connected to people and we are constantly hearing things and watching things and listening to things because of the television, because of our laptops, because of our tablets, because of our phones. Just think about it. How much time do you spend in a day without any of these things? In fact, we would be watching television and scrolling through our phone at the same time because we are unable to keep our phone aside to watch a movie or to watch an episode even. That is the level of noise that technology has brought into our lives. And though there are so many good things that have come out of technology, it is the biggest enemy of solitude because you have your phone all the time with you. And anytime you're bored, anytime you don't have anything to do, you pick up your phone. Even if there's nothing to do on your phone, you just pick it up and end up doing nothing. And that has made solitude very difficult and pretty much impossible unless we make an intentional effort to choose solitude. And that's why we're talking about it today. I remember a few years back when I was in France, I was alone, I was in a restaurant, in a cafe. I'm usually very good with going to restaurants or cafes by myself. I also make it a point not to take out my phone or use my phone. I'll usually have a book with me to read, or I'll have a notebook to kind of sit and journal. And that was what I was doing that day. I had a notebook and I was journaling. And then I noticed this woman beside me. And she didn't have a phone out. She didn't have a book to read. She didn't have a journal to write in. All she did was she was just sitting there looking around for a bit. Then she was staring into space. And I just admired her that day because I was like, I am patting myself on my back to tell myself that, oh, you did a great job, you're not using your phone. But I still had my book with me. I still was listening or reading someone else's opinion. And that's not wrong because reading is great. But how much time do we spend with our own thoughts? Because we are so bombarded by other people's opinions, other people's information, that even when we say something, and I've noticed this, that people, when they talk, and I've noticed this even in myself, that when I talk about a certain topic, sometimes, if I haven't taken the time to think about it, I'm just regurgitating something that I've read somewhere or something that I've heard somewhere. I haven't taken the time to actually think about, okay, what do I think about this? No, I'm just repeating what I heard someone say online. And that has become our reality. Our opinions are formed by other people and not by us taking the time and sitting with ourselves and thinking with ourselves about what I think about this situation. So if we truly desire to be thinking individuals, if we truly desire to be people with vision and purpose, we might need to take a step back and give up a little bit of technology that has taken over our lives. I'm not saying go back to the old ages where there was no phones and no technology, but we know ourselves, we know our weaknesses, we know where our time is going, because I can guarantee you that though you might say that you are busy, you still have time to watch an episode or two or three of a TV show every single night. You do have time to scroll through Instagram reels every single morning. So how busy are we really? So we might need to give up on technology. We might need to shut the TV down during certain times of the day. We might need to unsubscribe from some of the OTT platforms. We might need to restrict our usage of certain apps. We might need to delete the apps even. We might need to put our phones on do not disturb for maybe an hour a day. We might need to keep our phones in the other room to avoid that disturbance in our life and that desire to pick up the phone every single time there's a notification. There's so many things that we can do to turn down the noise, to turn off the noise, to reduce the noise to a degree that we can actually hear our own lives, not the lives of other people. It's time to turn down that noise, to be able to hear our own voices, our own thoughts, and that inner voice that guides us and leads us and enables us to do what we were supposed to do, what we were created to do on this earth. It might sound hard to give up technology, to turn down the noise, to give yourself the time to think, to sit with your thoughts. But trust me, I have tried it, and the sweetness and the peace that you get with solitude is unparalleled. If you talk to anybody who has made time for solitude in their lives, made solitude a part of their regular daily routine, all of them will tell you that life is richer, life is more creative, life is more peaceful, life is more productive, life is less anxious when we are able to sit alone in silence, reflecting, thinking, and in solitude. There are a lot of videos out there talking about this. There are a lot of books out there talking about this. I'll link some of them in the description if you want to go and research this further. But when we know, when it is proven that solitude as a regular part of your routine, daily routine is essential, then why wouldn't we take the effort to give ourselves that time and that space. If we are suffering with an ailment that doesn't allow us to live our best life, and then there's a doctor that comes to us and says, this is the medicine that will help you get rid of that ailment, of course we'll take it. Of course we'll take that medicine, even if it's a hard pill to swallow. We'll take it because a better life, a life free from that ailment, is something that we would want. In the same way, when noise is not allowing us to function to the best of our abilities, and the medicine to address that is solitude, why wouldn't we take that? Even if it is hard, even if it's a hard pill to swallow, why wouldn't we make that decision? Because isn't a better life worth it? In order to be extraordinary, we have to do something different than what the others are doing. If we do what others are doing, if we do what is easily done, we remain the same as everybody else. We remain ordinary. But if you are listening to this podcast, I believe that you are someone who wants to be extraordinary, who wants to be different, who wants to build your life one brick at a time, no matter how hard it might be in the moment, because you know that someday it's going to be worth it. So this is one of those steps. This is one of those bricks that needs to be laid into your daily routine. If you read the daily routines of great men and women in the world, all of them had solitude built in to their rhythms of life. To hear themselves, to understand themselves, to become themselves. To those of you who are still listening, thank you for joining. Thank you for listening to the end. If you have any further thoughts, comments, questions, DM me on Instagram at A Life Under Construction, or write to me at write to us at alifeunderconstruction.com. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can comment below the video as well. The more you like, share, comment, subscribe, follow to these podcasts, the more people it reaches. So I really would appreciate it if you did one of these or all of these, so that this podcast and these topics reach more and more people. Once again, thank you for listening, and I will see you again next week with another topic that will help you live a life of purpose and help you live the life that you were always meant to live.